Hi. The film I'll be talking about today is Five Easy Pieces. This film was directed by Bob Rafelson and stars Jack Nicholson and Karen Black. This film was released in 1970 and is truly an original film. It fits perfectly into that decade of 70s films that were swimming against the current and giving us characters that we'd never really seen before. These were not generic characters who, followed a formulaic plot. These were real people that were flawed, and we were getting an unvarnished look at them. The character in this film, Bobby Dupuy, is almost in some ways like this anti hero for all those that are unsatisfied with society, that are disenfranchised, that look at everyday life and think, there's got to be more. And for those who never feel at home anywhere, that ever feel like they're in a group where they belong, Dupuy is a character that when you see him, that's who he is as well. He knows what that's like. When I first saw this film, I knew nothing about it. And it starts off, and as I was watching it with the Tammy Wynette song playing, he's working on an oil rig. The song Stand By Your Man is playing as the credits are running. And I think I know at this point in the film what I'm in for, kind of a blue-collar character study. And then he goes home, and we see his girlfriend waiting for him in their little home that they have together, and she's cute in her little waitress outfit. And we start to see that Bobby Dupuy, who's played by Nick, is not necessarily that happy in this lifestyle. And as the film progresses, we see how he treats his girlfriend, who, for a guy who works on an oil rig, we think he would almost look at her like a trophy. She's cute. She's crazy about him. What's his problem? He's got cold beer in the refrigerator. They got a little place together. A lot of guys would kill to have a girl like her. I mean, especially one that waits on him hand and foot and, thinks the sun rises and sets on you. And he treats her so degradingly, in a way that you're kind of repelled by Dupuy, the way that he talks down to her in the film. And there's a scene where they're bowling, and with his friend from Elton from the oil rig. And, she's just out there having fun, and, he seems disgusted, like you've been doing gutter balls, and at the very end you do a strike. And it's like she's the dirt underneath his fingernails. Like he's just got nothing for her. And she's finally had enough, and he tells her to go wait in the car. And then he's flirting with these two other girls. And one of those girls is played by Sally Struthers. And at this point, we see that, monogamy is not one of this guy's strong suits. He just goes where he sees an opportunity to flirt with whoever he wants to. And he completely dismisses the one cheerleader that he seems to have. And as he makes his way to the parking lot, he's been invited to go, to his friend's house that he's there at the bowling alley with. She doesn't want to go. And he says, okay, fine. And he said, maybe some guy will come along and hit on you. She said, I would hope that they would. And he goes back and says, they won't hit on you. You're too pathetic looking right now. And you're just like, where is this hostility coming from? And eventually they does show them at their friend's house. They kind of reconcile, and you can tell by the way that she allows herself to be talked to that she is a doormat, and that she just clings for the moments when he's semi-civil to her. And we then see them at their friend's house, and their friends have a little baby, and she's holding the baby. Karen Black's character her name's Rayette in the film. And she's holding the little baby, and Bobby, while he's in the house, seems completely in his own world, and seems to kind of be, while that's his friend and they're at home, kind of disgusted with the whole thing. And they eventually leave, and then he and his buddy Elton are in a traffic jam one day. And they're drinking. It's early in the morning too, and they're, passing the flask back and forth. And so we start to understand these are guys that live hard. And at a certain point, he snaps, Bobby Dupuy does, and gets out of the car. he's just kind of walking around, and the horns are honking. And he walks up to this truck that's hauling front, and on the truck is a piano, and he just jumps up on it. And he sits and he starts playing the piano. And when I saw that, I was like, he can play, this guy who works on an oil rig plays piano. And that was the first wrinkle, that there's more to Dupuis than I had initially thought. And that was also the first insight into why maybe he always seemed to have a hostility toward the world that he lived in. That maybe he was not really of that world. And that scene gives you the first inkling that maybe there's a little something more to him, and that's why the constrainment of his everyday life is so suffocating to him. He knows there's more out there. He's got more culture than we initially think, and that those around him. And his friend eventually is trying to get him back in the car. Elton, like, come on, jump off. The truck's turning. It's go. He just stays on. And it shows the truck going to town, and he eventually jumps off, and the piano music continues to play beautifully in the film as he's just walking around the town at night, observing the different stores, walks by a barbershop, and then slowly makes his way to where Rayette works. And, she's in this diner, and there's, like one customer there, and he just kind of goes in and sits down, and they get outside, and she tries to take a stand against him, but it goes nowhere. She can't fight what draws her to him. And we can tell that even though he only gives her table scraps, she's willing to settle for that. And then the scene cuts to him being at work with the friend Elton, and he says, I think Rayette might be pregnant. And Elton says, well, what if I told you she actually was? He kind of looks at him, and he said, what if I told you it really wouldn't be that bad? It's kind of, life-changing, and in a good way. Might be the best thing that has ever happened to you. It was for me. Dupuis kind of looks at him and says, here I am listening to this cracker like you, who lives in a trailer with your wife and kid, compare your life to mine. He kind of sits back, and as I'm watching, me too, I'm kind of like, well, who are you to talk, dude? I mean, look where you are. You're on the rig with him, working the same thing, dating a waitress who works at a diner. I don't know why you're talking about yourself like, you're up here and he's just this scum down here. He goes one way and Elton goes another, and then we see Elton get accosted by these two men, and even though they've had a falling out, Bobby goes rushing to his defense and finds out that Elton says, I was accused of robbing a filling station a while back, and I jumped bail, and he realizes that the guys were cuffing him and that they're cops, and he didn't know that about his friend. And then he walks over to the guy working there and says, I quit. I'm out of here. We could tell the boss does not care. We then see him traveling into Los Angeles, where he walks into this recording studio where there's this lady there sitting there playing classical piano. And I have to add that in this film, the only music you hear is classical and Tammy Wynette. That's it. You'll hear classical piano, and then you hear a Tammy Wynette song. He's got a foot in both worlds. We then find that the woman playing piano is his sister, and he goes in to talk to her, and she explains to him that their father has taken ill, and that he's had 2 strokes and is really getting down, and you need to see him one last time. And he eventually agrees that he will. And then we see him have this very violent, that's not the right word, but very intense one night stand with one of the girls from the bowling alley. And the intensity of them coming together, and it's Sally Struthers in that scene. And the way that they just passionately cling to each other in that moment. And then it's over. He kind of raises up, and his hair's sweaty, and he just sort of, and this is right after he's talked to his sister, and he just sort of looks at her, and kind of smiles, and then he's gone. The reason I'm talking about that scene is that's kind of indicative of how he hits something and then it's over. He's never going to see her again. We know that is an audience. He doesn't love her. He gave the intensity of it. He got what he wanted from it. And now he's gone. And that's it. And you even get the feeling that she knew it too. And kind of he appreciated her in the sense that what you wanted from me, I can give you. So thank you for not wanting more, and thank you for only wanting what I'm willing to give. And then we see him make his way home to where Rayette's kind of in the fetal position, sitting there all balled up. She doesn't know that he's been out running around on her, but we get the feeling that it wouldn't surprise her. And he explains to her that he's going to see his family. And she's just despondent. And, he's leaving again, like probably sitting there thinking, whatever happened to the backbone? Did I ever even have one to allow myself to be treated in this fashion? He gets in the car, and Nicholson brings that intensity where he just has this breakdown, like, why can't I just leave her and cut and run? Why? Even though he treats her so horribly, there's some vestige of morality and compassion there that makes him go back in and say, okay, fine, come with me. And on the trip down, they pick up these two female hitchhikers who've wrecked their car. And it's one of the more interesting scenes in the film because it cuts, the shots are cut between outside exterior shots of them traveling and the scenery around them to shots in the car. And one of the females is like this hippie that's talking about, she's so disenfranchised with society and consumerism and how we're destroying everything. And her friend explains, yeah, that's why we're going to Alaska. Men ruin everything. We're nasty. Look at what we've done. And she is just completely fed up. And what's funny is she goes on these diatribes. It then cuts to a shot outside, then cuts back to her diatribe, then cuts back out, then cuts back in. And I have to give Rafelson credit. He did that so well. And Dupuis seems to be kind of amused by it. And even if he doesn't completely agree with everything she's saying, he's kind of enjoying the intellectual company on the trip because he doesn't get that from Rayette. And Rayette just seems completely put out with both of them and can't even understand how Bobby can tolerate this. And then probably the most famous scene in the film is when they're at this diner, this truck stop diner, and Bobby's attempting to order, and he just wants a plain omelet, toast, and she goes, well, you can't get toast because you have to get these two sides. If you're getting this, you can't get toast. Can't do it. You have bread here. And she's like, no substitutes, no this, no. So finally he is just disgusted with the waitress, and he's not backing down. And he says, okay, then give me a chicken sandwich, chicken salad with no chicken, no lettuce, no tomato, no mayo, and just, 2 pieces of toasted. And he's figured out a way to get what he wants on his terms. And she then asks, what is she supposed to do with the chicken? And he tells her to put it between her legs. And at that point, she's like, you guys just get out of here. I've had it with you, people like you. And she points and said, do you see what that sign says about refusing service to Rupert? And he said, see what? And he just knocks everything off the table, the drinks, everything, and they are out and on their way. And one of the hitchhikers, she's completely enamored with him. Like, wow, you really won that battle between her. You didn't let her wear you down. Those people that are a slave to the system, that, have such a fidelity to any rule, that live their life saying, but that's policy. She admires that this iconoclast got a victory, at least in that moment. And eventually he puts them out on the road as well. Gets to a little hotel, and his family, they're in Washington. That's where they're traveling from California. And basically tells Rayette to wait for him in this hotel, and then he'll come get her. But he's kind of got to establish himself with his family first and feel things out. She doesn't like this idea, but he tells her it's the best that he can do at the time. We then see him making his way home and find out what a cultured, intellectual family that he comes from. And as I said earlier, when we see him play the piano, that's like the first inkling that there might be more to him. And then this solidifies that. This is somebody who comes from a very well-to-do family of wealth and privilege, and where intelligence and, a family of pianists where they play classical piano, and he has completely shunned that. He walked away from it. He was repelled by it. Yet at the same time, he doesn't seem at home working on the oil rig. And as the audience, we start to be able to empathize a little bit with his plight. There's not a world that he feels comfortable in. And we also see the disdain that he seems to have for his family. He sees them as pretentious, and the silliness of it and how they take themselves so seriously. And he rebels against that the same way he rebels against the life of the common blue-collar worker who goes to work every day, puts in a hard day, comes home, opens up a beer, and then gets up tomorrow and does the same thing. He still doesn't like the alternative to that of, having friends come over while you drink expensive brandy and discuss, literature and great music. He seems to see that is vacuous as well. And what you start to see is what he really hates is just the monotony of life. Because any lifestyle, after a while, becomes a routine. Whether it's in a bohemian world, whether it's in a blue-collar world, eventually we have to invest and we become, a player in that life. And we start to understand that that's something that Bobby was never willing to do, and has an aversion to routine, has an aversion to fidelity, to monogamy, to normalcy. The term rebel without a cause, that's Bobby Dupuy. He is a rebel, but he seems to have no cause. He is just a rebel. And he meets this girl when he's back home, and they're kind of showing him around. He sees his father and the condition that he's in, who's working with his brother. His brother's been injured and wears this neck brace. And she's a pianist as well, and she's kind of holds the family in high regard. And we see immediately that he is intrigued by her, and in a way that he never has been with Rayette. And it's the first time that we really see Bobby have real human emotions and even want to invest in someone. And there's a scene where she's talking to him and she says, how did you just walk away from it and quit playing? How did it? And he tells her about how he played in Vegas, and they said, well, we wouldn't really consider. And he does this funny little routine where he's kind of playing it and then does the schmaltzy comedian and the girl's dancing and then gets back on. And we can tell that she's kind of enamored with his individuality, that this is not somebody that fits in a cookie cutter category. He's his own man. And eventually they're in the house together in a room, and she asks him to play something for her, and he does. And as he's playing and she's sitting there listening, the camera kind of shows the photographs on the wall of the family, of him as a young man, and we kind of get a feel for what he walked away from. And that there's so many layers to this guy that we didn't initially see. And no wonder he seems to be always fighting something. He doesn't know who he is. He doesn't have a place to return to. And he's the type of person that very few people could even begin to understand, because somebody like him, for everybody that he meets, they've never met anyone like him, which leads to a lot of loneliness. And as she hears him play it, we see how moved she is. And then he says, I didn't even have any feeling in that. And she's kind of let down by that, and she goes out. He follows her. She says, just leave. I'm, going to... And he doesn't accept that, and eventually he throws her down on the bed, and they kind of have this moment where they stare, and then they just come together. And we know that they've slept together. And then Rayette shows up, and they're kind of keeping everything that they've done quiet. And at a dinner, Rayette, his brother seems to almost find her ditziness and her naivete somewhat charming. And Bobby is kind of just disgusted with her being there and knows that she doesn't fit in this world. And you also get the feeling is offended on her behalf, because even though they're being nice to her, it's out of a kind of cruel amusement. And he doesn't like seeing her be treated like that. And there's a family friend over who's kind of pontificating about different things and speaking of Rayette like she's not even in the room and pointing. And Bobby takes up for her and calls her a pompous celibate and says, you don't even deserve to be in the same room with her, and just kind of storms out. And then he sees Carol later, who he's had the affair with, and explains to her that he wants to talk to her. She's kind of putting him off, and he says, I really need to talk to you. And she explains where they can get together and talk. And he's kind of explaining to her that he would like her to leave with him. And she looks at him and says, what would it come to? And that's the thing. What does anything in Bobby Dupuy's life come to? What's the end goal here? Where would it end up? How can you love me? You don't love anybody. How are you going to love me? I want to stay here. In essence, it was fun. I enjoyed it. But you're kind of a fun distraction. But you can't build a life on that. It was a meaningless tryst. I enjoyed it, but it's over now. And we then finally see Bobby wheeling his father out to talk to his dad. And his dad can't communicate at all. And he looks down, and as he's talking with him, and he says, we never were close. And I don't really know what to tell you about my life. You wouldn't think much of it. I don't stay any place very long. Not because I always want to go somewhere else or I'm on my way to the next thing, but I want to leave before it gets bad. And he then said, auspicious beginnings. And he cracks, and he says, we both know I wasn't any good, talking about the piano playing. And his father can't communicate, and he's just staring. And he's having to have this one-sided reckoning with the man that he walked away from, that took everything that was offered to him and threw it away. And it's not so much as though he's asking for forgiveness from his father, as much as he's trying to let his father know that he understands what he did. And that it's almost like he's saying, I know I'm no good. I'm rudderless, I bounce, from one place to another. I always seem to leave with less than I had going in. And it's not that he wants his father to accept it. It's as if he wants to see his father see him take accountability for it and know that he's not hiding from the things that he's done. And he's very well aware of what he has done. We then see him getting ready to leave, and his sister comes out and says, "You were going to leave without saying goodbye," and he apologizes, and they hug. And then Rayette says something like, "Watch the birdie." She's trying to take a picture, and she's again kind of like the bull in the china shop. And we then see them drive off. He pulls into a filling station, and she says, "I'm going to go in and get a cup of coffee. Do you want anything?" He just says no. And then he gets out, goes into the men's room, walks inside, takes his jacket off, and he just kind of looks down, and at a certain point looks in the mirror. And it's just like he's taking everything in. And he comes outside, and there's this truck hauling logs. And we can't hear, but we see the driver come around the front, and we see Bobby talking to him. And then it cuts to them both being in the truck. And he says, "You don't have a jacket?" And he said, "Nah." He said, it all went up in the fire. We realized he's concocted some story about why he needs a lift. And he said, "Okay, but it gets cold, headed north." And they're off. They're off. And then we see Rayette walk out to the car and we see her talking, but we can't hear anything. And we just see that truck's going. Bobby Dupuy once again is on his way to nowhere. He's always running with no destination. And at a time where it seems that films won't be greenlit unless they have a happy ending, and the way that almost the worst thing a film can do in this day and time is not only is it not a happy ending, it's ambiguous. It leaves a scratch in our head saying, well, how did she do that? It's very good to see a film that when it's over has you asking questions instead of thinking, oh, so that's how they're going to resolve it. That's what they're going to do. And to have someone who the director was brave enough, even though he's the main guy, to say that maybe you're not rooting for him. Maybe you don't like him. But you'll be compelled by him. And it sort of pushes something in us for those that are dissatisfied, but we don't have any answers. We only have questions. And Bobby Dupuy seems to represent that person who's given up looking for answers. He's just simply going to try to land somewhere else, make a little money there, and then he'll be on his way again. He's made peace with the fact that he's a drifter, that he's rudderless. He's rootless. He has no home. He's rootless. And certainly not a happy life, but it's his life. And the way that this film is filmed and how uncompromising it is and how it doesn't try to portray him as anything other than what it is, it really is a pleasure to watch. And if you haven't seen it, do yourself a favor. Until next time, thanks.